Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, the 13th of September. We have a lot to discuss this week, so let me get right to introducing you to this week's panel. We have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward. Penfield Tate, Denver attorney and community leader who served in both the Senate and House here in the Colorado Legislature. Elena Alvarez is joining us, reporter with Axios Denver, and Sage Nauman, who is a conservative columnist and commentator and strategist and owner of Anthem Communications. Thank you all. This is a big week. We have a lot to talk about. So on Tuesday, Americans watch what may be the final debate between the two presidential candidates. And President Trump brought up Aurora in his first answer as a town that has been overrun by a Venezuelan gang. Congressman Jason Crow, Patty, said that is an exaggeration. And then on Wednesday of this week, Mike Kaufman and also a Durinsky councilperson came out and said, everyone, hold off.
It was thrilling in the first 5 minutes of that debate to have Trump mention Aurora and the Venezuelan gangs. The only thing he left off was suggesting that people's pets were on the menu in Aurora. It was ridiculous. It's so wrong. I mean, there is no question that Aurora has problems. They also have problems with communicating clearly. And that's the big issue in Aurora right now, which is it took Trump talking on the debate about Venezuelan gangs in Aurora to have the mayor and the councilwoman who is the head of his public safety committee to actually get together and put out a memo together. Danielle Durinsky has been one of the prime speakers pushing the Venezuelan gangs narrative nationally and internationally. Kaufman's been flip-flopping, so he hasn't done a great job. They need to get all Aurora officials in a room and figure out what the real story is, what the timeline is, what facts they actually have, and what is just complete malarkey. Our reporter Benito Kelty, who's from Aurora, grew up there, went out and talked Wednesday night in a complex in Spanish with migrants, and they're like, the only gangs here are the cockroaches.
Okay. Now, Elena was telling us earlier this week, Durinsky and Kaufman were planning to make that statement before the debate. Is that right?
Well, maybe they couldn't agree till after the debate.
Maybe.
Well, you know, and that's not unusual. Aurora, like other cities, sometimes has trouble coordinating its messages. But I think this story, there are two, I think, key takeaways. Number one, it is frightening to watch an aspirant for president of the United States take the approach that if I scare everybody to death, maybe they'll vote for me. And that's how that conversation comes across to the general public, especially when outside of the debate on the stump, he and his VP start talking about people eating cats and dogs and other people's pets. It just sounds disgusting and scary. But, you know, what was interesting is when Aurora finally did respond, they made it clear that they'd been working on this for months. They've been arresting suspected gang members since last March. So it's not like they've had their heads in the sand. They know they have an issue. They know they need to address it. Perhaps it hasn't been perfect, but they're not, you know, just blindly ignorant of the situation, which is what Trump was sort of suggesting. And that's just flat false.
Elena, you've been covering this every day.
It's been really hard to keep up because their messaging keeps changing, Aurora officials. But I want to talk a little bit about the debate in general, big picture. You know, pundits seem to agree that Kamala Harris won this one. Trump didn't do so badly that, you know, any of Trump voters probably aren't going to switch their party. Anybody on the fence is probably not going to be swayed into his camp. Colorado Democrats in general are so much more confident and feeling really good about the fact that they were so quick to line up behind Kamala Harris when Biden dropped out. I also wanted to make a note just as a journalist talking about commending ABC's moderators, David Muir and Lindsay Davis, for fact-checking on the fly, which was very different than we saw at the CNN debate in June. It reminded me a lot of Kyle Clark, who went viral not too long ago for fact-checking at a local debate. And he was actually interviewed by NPR ahead of this debate to talk about best practices that moderators should look to. And so I really hope that this becomes more of the norm. It's really important. You can't let politicians spew falsehoods. They have plenty of platforms to do that, and it's really important for us in the media to hold them accountable. So I was really glad to see that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'm actually very disappointed in the moderators for not asking who the candidates would appoint as a new ambassador to the Venezuelan People's Republic of Aurora, because I think it's vitally important to know how we're going to deal with this new government we're dealing with right there on the border of Denver. No, I mean, as any issue surrounding immigration, everything is either blown out of proportion or it's shoved to the side, depending on what side you're on. And the truth is always somewhere in the middle. And what we're seeing in Aurora, I think, is that there is truth to a little bit of each side. There is probably some truth to the fact that these buildings were not being maintained properly. There is some truth to the fact that there is gang activity, Venezuelan gang activity in the city, and perhaps in those complexes. And so I will give just a little bit of grace to leaders like Mayor Kaufman, who I think are trying to get all the information. And obviously the information that's coming is either completely contradictory, and it's coming at, sometimes the same exact day. I can't blame them for it, but the fact is that everything is partisan and polarized now. So it's all about advancing someone's agenda.
Let's talk about the election in general. A poll came out this week in Colorado that showed Harris with a 15% lead over President Trump for likely voters here in Colorado. 4 weeks from today is when ballots will be mailed out here in Colorado, and early in-person voting will be available the following week, starting on the 21st of October. Penn, I'm going to start with you with the shape of this race.
It's interesting. In terms of the election, I think the polling is right in Colorado, and I'm curious to see if Colorado is reflective of a broader trend. One of the things we see in Colorado is a number of legislators I served with, Republicans, have long since switched to unaffiliated or independent because they wanted to distance themselves from the party as Trump has turned it into. So when you see polling among independents or unaffiliated in Colorado, that's significant because that's a lot of disaffected Republicans who have just left the party. In terms of some of the other races, I think Adam Frisch has a tough road to hoe. His campaign was perfect to take on Lauren Boebert and beat her this time. Then she fled to the Eastern Plains, where she has a greater statistical advantage, and she will probably win that. I don't know who's going to win the race against Caraveo. That's going to be close. So Colorado is going to be interesting. I think it's also telling that the vice president decided not to do an event here. She sent her running mate instead because I think Colorado is in the bag for them.
Okay. All right. Elena.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around how long Denver's ballot is going to be. I know this was talked about a little bit last week at this table, but there's 11, I believe, ballot measures on Denver's ballot. There's another dozen statewide measures. So it's going to be a historically long ballot. My team of 3 reporters is already scrambling to figure out what our voter guide is going to look like, because this is really important for voters. They have so much to digest, and all of these issues, all of these questions are quite complicated and take a lot of research. And we are trying to get as much information as we can to them as soon as possible. But it is overwhelming, no doubt. And I'll be really curious to see, obviously it's a presidential year, so that usually means higher turnout. But what it actually looks like as far as people answering these questions, if voters are going to be immediately turned off by just flipping through page after page after page on their ballot, or if they will give it the time that these questions really deserve, because they're so complicated. So we're working on that, and we'll be very busy for the next month.
No days off until November.
I understand the excitement coming from the left to have a candidate who is able to form a coherent sentence and prove to the American people that they can actually, be the president of the United States. But I think the entire situation is unfortunate, because when you compare this debate, both candidates, to what we had, let's say, in 2012, Romney and Obama look like, Plato and Aristotle, and that's, back then we were talking about how there wasn't enough specifics in their policy proposals. I think that Kamala Harris did a really good job of showing that she can be on that stage. Unfortunately, I walked away not knowing any specifics about any of her policy proposals. And what she really needs to do is distance herself from the Biden administration as much as she can, which is hard because she's a part of it. But right now, Donald Trump's advantage is on the policy issues. A New York Times Siena poll from just a few days ago showed that the top 3 issues are inflation, immigration, and the economy. Donald Trump is leading on those issues by 7, 12, and 7 points. That's substantial. If there was any other candidate as the Republican nominee, Kamala Harris would be losing right now. The only reason that Kamala Harris has a chance in this is because she's running against Donald Trump. She has to give specifics. She has to show how she'd be different than the Biden administration because people are not happy with the direction this country's going.
But in Colorado, she's ahead by 15%. How do you think that's going to affect other Republican candidates?
I mean, if it's a 15-point loss, it's going to be dramatic. I mean, I think Biden won by 13, Hillary won by 6, if my numbers are correct. So yeah, 15 points is not going to be good for down ballot Republicans.
We have to remember in Colorado, not the majority of all voters, but the largest party is the unaffiliated party. And I think Coloradans are pretty capable of dividing up who they really want to vote for. It's not going to be by party. It will be by candidate. Here, they're going to be so relieved that Harris is available, as opposed to Trump, who's never been popular in Colorado, that she will do very well here. But that's not necessarily going to translate into a win for Caraveo, but that one's going to be close. I think what's fascinating is the big news Tuesday night was Taylor Swift endorsing, and then the number of people who immediately went to register to vote, none of them Venezuelan gang members, as far as I could tell, but over 300,000 people immediately went to vote. So what has also happened with the Harris candidacy is we've seen young voters, people who hadn't registered before, young people who've been divided over the Palestine-Israel issue, but they are now getting involved in the vote. So that's going to be huge. Let's also thank Colorado for mail-in votes. Let's hope the U.S. Post Office can get those ballots out, because not only do we have the 11 in Denver, we have the smaller ones in Denver, the ballpark district, and also the downtown district extension, and those are important.
On Monday, Colorado Parks and Wildlife announced the capture of a family of gray wolves. The adults were introduced in our state back in December, and they've been deemed responsible for the killings of ranch livestock. And since that capture, CPW is investigating a new report of wolf depredation in Grand County. Elena, this is another topic that you've been covering this week with all this controversy around these wolves. And they have been removed from now, this one pack. But the CPW is continuing with the plans throughout the next 6 months to release more wolves.
That's right. That's what they say. They feel confident in pursuing this plan, which includes introducing up to 15 wolves by this upcoming March. And we just got a press release actually from Parks and Wildlife that a third wolf has actually died. 3 out of the 10 wolves. This is a major setback for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And this is a program that the governor and the first gentleman care about very, very deeply. Something that I found interesting, it was reported in Colorado Politics, was that a couple of ranchers whose livestock have been killed by wolves sent a letter to the federal government asking the federal government to take control of the reintroduction program. And in that letter, they said some interesting things. One, that most of these decisions were actually being made by the governor and the first gentleman, which we haven't confirmed, but it does align with how deeply they do care about this issue. And 2, they had said, again, I can't confirm this yet, but that they have heard from CPW officials directly that is in fact true, that these decisions are coming from the governor. But the big picture is that nobody is really happy with how this program is rolling out on either side. Ranchers, obviously, but you have wildlife groups who are, up in arms about this pack, the first breeding pack in Colorado, being relocated, and the leader who was believed to have done a lot of that livestock killing to feed his family, is now dead. So they're not winning, and Polis, I think, is pretty stressed about how this looks to the public.
It's a shame that no one could have foreseen this, happening. Nobody was warning that the reintroduction of wolves in the state would probably not go very well for anyone involved. Look, I understand the first gentleman has a deep passion for wildlife, and I appreciate that. The fact is that if it wasn't for the fact that the governor and the first gentleman were so passionate about this would have probably been gone already. The lawmakers, I think, would have already revisited and got rid of it. And if they're scared of that, if they're scared of especially going against the will of the voters, then make it a referred measure. This is not working for anyone who's involved. We've talked about wolves, I can't tell you how many times on this program, and it comes up every 2-3 months as being, and it's one side or the other. Now we're having the wolves dying, and it's livestock dying, it's ranchers upset. This entire program has been a mess, and it needs to go. And if the legislature isn't willing to do it, they should put it on the ballot and let the voters decide. And I can almost guarantee you they will realize that they made a mistake and get rid of it.
Patty?
It's another issue where communication has been really bad between CPW and the ranchers. This week we got some of the emails that have been sent by a CPW employer, and they got a little more heated than they probably needed to be from a public official. I'm really curious about where more wolves would come from, because speaking of communications, the tribe that agreed in Oregon, that agreed to let some of their wolves come down here, didn't know that the Ute, Mountain Ute, and the Southern Ute didn't really want them, hadn't been consulted about them being released near there. So this tribe has said, we are not going to make more wolves accessible. So we seem to have a wolf shortage. And I don't know, maybe Venezuelan gang members will be released instead. But Colorado's plan is really problematic right now.
It is. Penn.
You know, unfortunately, this is a perfect example of a policy that does not appear to have been well thought out, has not been implemented well, and is now just, there's a combination of errors. And it's just, as Sage said, it's a hot mess.
As a former legislator, do you think the legislative body would take it up, like Sage was suggesting, maybe?
I think they should, and I appreciate the fact that they probably don't want to, because they don't want to end up crosswise with the governor. But the problem is so many of them are going to hear from so many of their constituents. They may be compelled to take it up. And this is one of those deals where maybe you need a series of big hearings in the old Supreme Court chambers and let a lot of people come in and give their opinions and thoughts on this major policy decision, because it has not gone well.
So as we've been talking about, when you receive your ballot in a little over a month, expect it to be around 4 to 5 pages deep. Is that what we're hearing? There's a lot before us. So Colorado Inside Out will focus on one measure every week leading up to Election Day. Question 7A is the RTD ballot initiative. RTD is asking to keep tax revenue it collects and making the transit agency indefinitely exempt from the limitations of TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Sage, let's start with you.
So obviously I could go into, my opinion on TABOR and taxpayers keeping their money, but I think when it comes to RTD, it's worth examining what their goals are and what their purpose is. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about like light rail, for example, a lot of the mentality behind light rail, going back 20, 25 years was if you build it, they will come. Because you can't possibly, with our suburban sprawl, put stations everywhere where they'd make sense. Getting from anywhere to Denver would take 4 hours. So the idea was, where we have these stations, we're going to see more density because people are going to want to be near this mass transit. That really hasn't happened. I was perusing through the Denver subreddit because there were a lot of threads about RTD and a lot of folks in there who used to ride the light rail, and we're talking about how they're no longer. And look, this is a subreddit where most people on there are not conservatives. And one after the other was talking about how they didn't feel safe. The trains weren't showing up. They were late. Whatever it was, they would have to Uber to get to where they were going, and they could no longer rely on it. They have to show the people that live within RTD that they can actually provide services, and most of all, do it safely. I would say people have to really consider, is this a sunk cost fallacy where it's let's just keep dumping money in and hope that it's going to get better? Or does RTD actually have a vision and a plan to get from point A to point B?
And RTD serves 8 counties in this region, 40 municipalities. So we're talking, it's not just Denver and just the suburbs.
Right, we'll be voting on this.
Right.
And it's an extension of a previous measure. So it's not completely new, the concept. They want to be able to keep the excess tax revenue, but they have to redo it because of TABOR. Let's remember that just last session, when the legislature wasn't talking about property tax and everything else, they considered really restructuring RTD, putting on more board members, giving them more accountability for the service that's horrible and the service that doesn't exist. And legislators failed to push something through. And I think a lot of people would feel more comfortable voting to let RTD keep more money if there were some changes being made at RTD that showed that passengers wouldn't be stuck in slow-moving trains for many months, that downtown construction, even though it was faster than it was supposed to be, that it wouldn't be necessary to disrupt all of downtown because of old equipment. So I think this will probably pass, but I also think RTD needs some, not just to talk about what they're doing, but how they're doing it.
The legislature and the governor have gotten all twisted in knots, arguing about the political management of RTD rather than everybody focusing on the core issue, which is how do we get safe, reliable, affordable transit and transportation infrastructure developed in the region that works for people. No one believes that RTD has done it or can do it. I mean, Sage talked about our existing light rail system. in the early days, I thought it was flawed because it focused on getting people from outside in and inside back out, but it didn't move people around in the middle. And that's where a lot of people are who need to move around from point to point. And the buses aren't working well for everybody, which is why now even CDOT is looking at bus rapid transit on Colorado Boulevard rather than RTD. So there's a fundamental problem. In order to get the transit solutions we need, it's going to take money. If this measure fails, RTD is going to lose something like $24 to $60 million from their budget. And if you think service is problematic now, lose $24 to $60 million and see how it's going to look then.
To Pin's point, I don't think there's many people that would disagree with the fact that RTD needs all the help it can get, and much of that comes with money. Also, good management on the board, which has been, full of dysfunction in the past. But one thing that I found really interesting is that there's a letter of endorsements that is behind this initiative. And you have, a dozen legislators, there's council members, there's lots of advocacy groups. And one name that's missing, there's the mayor coalition, there's a lot of lawmakers, policymakers, but one name that's notably missing is Governor Polis's. I don't cover him extremely closely to know whether this is an issue that he would just not touch, but the fact that he's pushed public transit so much, pushed, putting affordable housing next to these transit stations, I thought it was interesting that he's not on there. Going back to my point about everyone, generally agreeing that RTD needs help. Something that I think might hang people up on this ballot initiative is the indefinitely part, the potentially permanently exempting RTD from Tabor limitations. That's something that I think deserves a second look and could give people pause, because considering the way that it's been managed in the past, just giving them this pass forever is a little concerning, and I don't know if that's playing into Polis's thinking at all. I've asked the governor's office; they haven't answered, so we're still waiting to see, what they're really thinking.
Let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. You can watch all the ballot discussions that we've been having here on CIO since the start of August on the CIO YouTube page or on the Colorado Inside Out page on pbs12.org under the specials category. So get educated before Election Day. Now, let's talk about some of the highs and lows from this week. Patty, let's start with the lows.
RTD has enough trouble without a so-called street artist putting up racist, ill-advised signs. So Sabo did get cited for another action last March, but we'll see if the DPD winds up charging him in this case, too.
That's a good one. I think for government to be responsive, sometimes you have to listen. I am disappointed that the city of Denver changed the traffic pattern on a number of streets without telling people in advance they were going to do it. I live in Park Hill, and York Street between 26th and Colfax got redone, where it shrinks to one lane and then has restricted lanes. And it's a major north-south thoroughfare. And it's almost impossible to get through now.
This one is an easy one. I have to give it to Donald Trump. I was going to go with, him spewing the conspiracy theory about Haitian immigrants eating pets, which, by the way, that's not even really the right conspiracy. It was more about ducks, not dogs and cats. But another thing that he said that I'm going to award this to him for was the fact that he has a concept of a plan when it comes to replacing the Affordable Care Act. And, considering he's a presidential candidate, you would think he would have some policies. But on the upside, I might use that line when my editor asks, what I'm working on.
Your concept for a story.
Yeah.
Yes, I like that.
I was going to tell you my low, but I'm still working on the concept for it. No, mine is on a personal note. My full name is Sage Thomas Nauman, and Thomas comes from my great uncle Thomas Timman, who unfortunately passed away earlier this week. Considered really the funny man of the family. My father and his siblings were very close to him. Unfortunately, I grew up on an opposite coast, so I didn't get to see him a lot during my childhood, but I did get to see him right before COVID hit when I visited the East Coast. A wonderful man, a wonderful sense of humor, and he will be very, very missed in my family.
Oh, we're sorry, but I can see where the sense of humor.
Yeah.
He's a pretty funny guy, everybody.
Carried through the bloodline.
Yeah. Patty, something good.
Art can be great, Colfax Canvas, which is a mural festival, is back in Aurora. So go to Aurora on Colfax Avenue, see some great art tomorrow. And also Jim Green, the creator of Train Call at Denver International Airport. You've heard the voices on the train. You've heard that tiddly music. He created it and passed away yesterday.
The music, and you wrote a nice
And the
article.
messages too. Originally, that was part of the art.
And there's a great article in Westward about him. So you see the face and hear about the story behind all that.
The doors closed on him.
I would say big ups to the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition, which yesterday celebrated its 25th anniversary of existence. A group of volunteers who started trying to reform how the Corrections Department and law enforcement interacts with citizens and working on reform. 25 years later, they've made some tremendous strides.
Boulder was just named a finalist, one of 3 finalists to host the Sundance Film Festival, which I think would be really, really exciting. They won't announce the winner until I think early February, but they're up against Cincinnati, Ohio, and Salt Lake City and Park City, which have a joint bid in Utah. And I think it would be way better if it was held in Boulder.
It would be awesome.
Yeah.
I know the bar is like yay low when it comes to civility and politics, but on the anniversary of September 11th at Ground Zero, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were both there, and former Mayor Bloomberg got the idea to, hey, let's get them to shake hands in public. I know it is a very small thing, but if you had told me that I'd be watching them shaking hands at any point in time, I would say, no, that's not going to happen. So I know that it's a very, very small victory for civility, but it is something to watch them stand side by side and for just one moment in time put aside their political agendas and recognize what happened on September 11, 2001. So,
As we all should. That's an important day for us all to stop, right? And
absolutely.
okay, my high is I went to Buena Vista for the first time last weekend, and it was a high time. I highly recommend it. And I did start seeing very high up a few yellow leaves, so it's starting. All right, thank you, insiders, for this week. Big discussion. We appreciate all of your insight. Thank you for watching and being engaged with what's happening around you. Thanks for watching online or on listening to our podcast. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.